Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Wednesday, January 22nd. I'm your host, Brian Hamilton. Thank you for joining us today. I encourage all of you to join us on social media. You can connect with the Healthcare Security Cast on our LinkedIn group and Facebook page. You can also connect with me directly on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. I try to keep things simple by being the only Brian, that's Brian, B-R-I-N-E, Hamilton, on all of these platforms. So I'm pretty easy to find. If you're in the Greater Toronto area, or will be on March 11th, the IAHSS Ontario chapter is hosting a free education event. Now, this isn't a situation where you're getting what you pay for. This is a packed agenda featuring Healthcare Security Cast Episode 1 guest and IAHSS President-elect Paul Sarnese. Use the link in the description to register. Now, for today, we have a special cast featuring North America's networking guru, Michael J. Hughes. We discuss various aspects of networking, and this is going to be a longer episode, so we're going to get right into the content. Thank you for joining us today, Michael. Let's start by learning a little bit about you. Who is Michael J. Hughes?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've been around a long time, Brian, and initially started out in the retail world. I worked 23 years in the corporate world in sales and management. And, I tell people at the peak of my corporate career, I was literally and figuratively fired into success. And I always like to let that hang there for about 30 seconds. And when that happened, being equal measure French, Canadian, Irish heritage, I did one of those, I'm mad as heck, I'm never taking this anymore. I'm never putting my future in someone else's hands. So decided to start my own training practice. It was a great idea and it was wonderful. But, in the spirit of full disclosure, those first couple of years really didn't go all that well. And I remember sitting with one of my mentors and I was lamenting my situation to him. And he looked at me and he said, Michael, you're a one-person company. You got to get out there and network more. You got to work your network. Now, I was a middle-aged professional. I thought I knew what networking was, but I respected this person and I decided to take his message seriously. So I started researching networking, reading everything I could get my hands on and watching those successful people. I watched what they did. I watched how they acted and started implementing those principles I read about and the strategies I saw people do. And I got to tell you, not overnight, but what started to happen was a change in my business started to grow and develop. And so what happened was people started to ask me, Mike, you're doing well. Like, what are you doing? So I would tell them, and they would say, well, geez, do you have a course on this? Or have you got a book I can read? And I started doing presentations on networking. And eventually I made the decision to put my stick in the sand and become known as a subject matter expert on networking. And for the last 25 years, I've been relentlessly, some would say obsessively focused on helping professionals understand what networking really is, how it works, and how to utilize it more effectively to help their business or their career.
It appears that you have the same experience as many of the people in my field, including myself, where this wasn't what you originally set out to do, but it kind of happened organically.
Well, they say things in life happen to you either by design or by default. And in my case, it was more by default. But like many other people, what I did was looked at my situation and just decided to follow my passion. I've always been good at presenting. I enjoy it. I'm passionate about this topic. I really believe it's one of the areas that professionals don't understand and really aren't taking advantage of. And I really believe today it's more important, more necessary, more valuable than it ever has been.
So you touched on the importance of networking. It's obviously an important skill for our success both personally and professionally. Why are these skills so critical today?
Well, I got to tell you that everybody talks about technology today driving everything that's happening. And that's true. Technology is, in fact, overtaking our lives. But from a human standpoint, it's made the connections that we have with others more important. We're human beings. We're social animals. We need to be together. So counterintuitive as it sounds, with the addition of technology into the professional world or into our lives in general, the human contact we have, our ability to connect with other people and build relationships is more important, more valuable, more necessary, and has more impact in our life and in our success.
Is it important to have a strategy for how we network?
Well, that's a really important question because too many people see networking as an activity. And when you really think about it, networking is a ing thing. It's something you do on an ongoing basis, right? And so it's important for people to recognize that networking is not just going to a monthly meeting. It's not attending a conference. Yes, it is that, but it's much more than that. Networking is something we do every single day with everyone we meet and everyone we know. I mean, isn't it true when you go into work every day, you interact and network with your colleagues? If you're out there in the business world, you're connecting with clients. There are stakeholders that we deal with all the time. So the transition that I made when I thought about networking was moving it from, in the sales business, it's called a prospecting strategy. That's kind of the bad word about networking. But the more I looked at networking, the more I gravitated to seeing networking as a strategy, because what I could see was in all the people that I knew, if I could connect with the right people, build the right relationships, I could get to where I want to go. And then the last piece is, and this is really, I've arrived at this over the last, I'd say, 7 to 10 years, is seeing networking really for the fundamental premise of what it is. My philosophy is that networking is not about going to an event and telling and selling, and getting people after a 30-second conversation to try and hire you or refer you. Networking's true purpose, its fundamental premise, is to bring two individuals together and act as a catalyst for the powerful relationships that are the basis for success in business and in life.
The Michael J. Hughes definition of networking. That's a great way to look at it.
See, and that's a whole paradigm shift. That's a mindset change for people. I keep telling people, networking to me is a relationship igniter and a relationship accelerator. It links into the process of relationships. Guy told me a long time ago, he said, success in business and life is all about relationships. And when I say that, most people agree. And so if you think about the important relationships in your life, and you could go back in those relationships at the starting point, isn't it true that you met them somewhere? I mean, you were taking your child to the hockey practice and one of the other moms was there and you started chatting with her, or someone new came into work in your office and you ended up having coffee with them. And out of that grew this incredible relationship. That's what networking is all about in my mind. And that's what I really believe.
Something I wanted to pull out of that, you mentioned that we do this every day. We network with the people that we work with. And just thinking of it from that context, I think that's something that we overlook a little bit. Is there a different strategy that you take when you're networking with either your internal employees, your colleagues, or internal customers?
Excellent question, because a lot of people tell me, you say, Mike, I work in the corporate world, and I don't have time to go out to events like Chamber of Commerce meetings and that. And my response is always the same. I mean, if you change your mindset about networking from being this nebulous thing that you've got to go outside and do, and you look at your own network, each and every one of us has a vibrant and dynamic network that we've developed, that we've nurtured, that we've accumulated over time. And that's through our career, through our work responsibilities, and really through our community that we deal with. And so what I tell people is, if you look at networking as the interactions you have every single day with everyone that you meet, you can then look at how to leverage this resource, because that's exactly what it is. You can better leverage that to help you get to where you want to go. Now, that starts off with thinking of networking from a couple of different perspectives. First of all, as a strategy as opposed to an activity. And what that means is looking at your life and saying, where do I want to go? And how can I get there? What relationships do I need to develop in order to get to where I want to go? So the first thing I suggest to people is, first of all, do you have a career plan? And if you have a career plan, even within your corporation, even within your enterprise or your industry, the next thing you want to think about is, what relationships could I develop or do I need to develop in order to get there faster? And so networking is really about identifying the right relationships and then nurturing them to help you get to where you want to go. Because see, one of the things I've researched as well as networking is networks. And networks, because when you do networking, you do it within the context of a network, right? And the network could be an industry association. It could be a corporate environment that you work in, or it could be a community environment that based on what you're interested in. But networks have fundamental principles. And one of them is called the law of preferred attachment. And that says in any network, certain connections, because of their position, because of their influence, or because of their power, can have more potential for us as individuals. So what I tell people is, number one, what's your career strategy? Do you have one? The second one is, have you identified those individuals who can have the biggest impact on that career? And there's two pieces in that I tell people. I tell people you should have a top 10 list. Who are the top 10 people in your network that you feel can have an impact in there? And in those top 10, who are what I call the big three? Who are the three most important, powerful, influential individuals that you feel can have an impact in your career? So that's number two. So number one is have a plan. Number two is identify those highest value relationships. And number three is start a network strategy that will have you connect with those people and build stronger relationships with them.
You touched on this a little bit now. Some of the folks in our field just don't have the ability due to workload to get out to networking events or different events where they can meet people outside of their organization. What do you recommend for these individuals?
Yeah, and that's not uncommon. So rather than, I'm a proponent of external networking because what it will allow you to do is get out there in the marketplace and make new connections. But if you just want to network internally, it's first of all, have your own plan, have a strategy, but then look at building relationships internally. Find those people you know can be of service to you. Now, identifying the people is one thing. The harder piece is how do you actually do it, right? Because that's what people tell me. They say, Mike, I know who the people are in the organization that I want to connect with. How do I do it? So the fundamental premise here is it's all about relationships. So if you think in terms of relationships are really about three things. They're about trust, value, and contribution. If you think of the two or three highest value relationships in your life right now, those high value relationships have all three pieces. An incredible basis of trust. Because isn't it true that the important people in our life, we have incredible trust with them? And so it's all about developing that. The second thing is value. Now, value is a two-edged sword. If you've identified those two or three highest value relationships in your life that you feel can help you, you can see right away how they can help you. The dynamic is how can you help them? And if you get to know people, there's always a way that you can be helpful to them. So it's about trust. And trust, by the way, is a continuous process. Trust is not something you just get, and it's earned on a daily basis. Everything we do, every interaction we have with someone either adds trust or takes away trust. Value, on the other hand, is an acquired taste. It happens over time, right? Because you may talk to somebody now and you say, well, geez, I don't know how I can help you. But if you got to know them better and appreciated what their needs were and where they wanted to go, you'd be able to find a way to be helpful to them. So it's about being continuously involved with those people so that you can elicit where you can be of service to them. And the third one is contribution. Because once someone trusts you, that opens the door. Once you discover value, that's how you can contribute to them. And then the third piece is how you contribute to their life. Because once you can make a sincere contribution to someone's life, they will see you differently and they will work on your behalf for weeks and years to come.
Okay, keeping that in mind, now when we get to that scenario where we're in the room with somebody from that top three, how do you get the conversation started?
And that's always an important point, right? Because when you get in front of those people, it can have an impact on your career or can have influence and help you get ahead. It can be intimidating. It can be difficult. And so my recommendation is always the same. Number one, first and foremost, think of it as a process. Versus an activity. People say if I can find out one thing to do, they'll fall in love with me and they'll promote me or they'll help me or they'll work on my behalf. It's a process. Relationships are a process rather than activity. So the process is a starting point. The most powerful starting point to get a relationship going. There's three drivers for relationship. There's context, There's communication and contribution. So the starting point is context. And context is really finding something that you have in common, some interest area, some complementary issue that the two of you have and that you can get to work on. So first and foremost, it's about establishing context. And that's easy to do. And people say, well, geez, he's executive VP of marketing and what do we have in common? The point is that doesn't matter. What really matters is that the two of you are in the same room. And so rather than thinking you have to carry the conversation, I tell people to develop the two most important communication skills we all have. And the two most important communication skills are being a better listener and asking better questions. So rather than thinking that you have to carry the conversation with that important person, what you want to do is think in terms of how can I get him or her talking so that they'll start talking about themselves? Because what do we like to do more than talking about ourselves, right? And so all that is through just some, whether you want to call them conversation starter, it's pre-planned questions that you would have. And it's as simple as, the situation you're in, whether it's this project, whether it's the same town you live in, whether it's the weather, whether it has to do with, it's getting that conversation started so that the other person will go. And I tell people, first of all, the fact that you and that other person are in the same room is a predetermined context, right? Because you're both there together. So if you use that to start a conversation around so the relationship is already there. A relationship starts in an instant. And your job is to grow that forward. So what I tell people is you can use what I call the SAFE conversation starters. SAFE stands for situation, activities, and people give us clues about their activities, whether it's a pin they wear, whether it's the nice tan they have, whether it's the way they look, whether it's something they say. Family, what's more important to us than our family, right? And then the last one is current events, staying away from religion, politics, and sex. So it's all about starting that initial conversation and utilizing that as a way to get another contact with that person. This is a process, remember? Relationships take time, they need to be nurtured, and they require investment. So it's all about getting the conversation started, gathering information so they can use that as a way to have that person want to connect with you again.
And just a bit of a segue from that point. Now we've got the conversation started. How do we keep that conversation going?
Well, the simplest way I've found, and by the way, let me give you my simplest and most effective conversation starter. If you and I were to meet, I would say, hi, my name is Michael. Your name is, and generally people will tell you their name. And when they tell me their name, I say, tell me about Brian. And so right away that person says, whoa, where should I start? I should start at the beginning. Are you from the Toronto area? Well, no, I was born in Calgary and I worked there and I can get them talking about themselves. So generally, it's very easy to get people talking. The issue with most professionals is they get so wrapped up in that interaction, they feel they need to tell, like a tennis match, go back and forth, right? And I tell people, stop doing that. Become a researcher. A researcher would what? Would ask probing questions, would express interest, keep things going. Because the more you can keep them talking, the more they give you information. The more information you have, the more you can see how you can link into that information, how you can use it to build even more context, and as a basis to have that person want to meet with you again.
Okay, so we've made the initial contact. What are your recommendations for following up after?
Yeah, and one of the biggest misconceptions about networking is that people will hire you, refer you, promote you, or work on your behalf after a 30-second to 3-minute conversation. And the reality is that just doesn't happen. And so, as I mentioned, relationships take time, they need to be nurtured, they require investment. So there's a necessity for us to understand that if we're going to use networking as an effective relationship building tool, that we have to link into the process. The process is ignited by that 30-second to 3-minute conversation, which can be interesting, can be informative, have enthusiasm, have a transfer of information, and begin the value generation process for both people. But it's important and necessary. Even it's imperative for an individual to understand. If you're at a networking event or if you're in a meeting and you've talked to someone you think could have an impact on your career, on your life, on your success, it's your responsibility to move that relationship forward. And some of the ways to do that are, first of all, to recognize there is more action required. That's number one. It's not going to happen on its own. Number two is to take full and complete responsibility for that. And number three is to take that information that you got from that other person and use it as the basis to continue building the relationship. It's about relationship building. Relationships take time. They need to be nurtured. They require investment. So take that information. So people say, well, okay, but when should I follow up? I don't want to seem too eager because I don't want to ruin this. Here's what my experience has been: the longer you wait between the contact and the follow up, the harder it is to renew the energy and enthusiasm of that conversation. The sooner you follow up, and I recommend to people 12 to 24 hours. Reconnect with that person within 12 to 24 hours to keep the relationship moving forward. In fact, my experience has been the sooner after the event that you follow up with that person, the better your chances are of having them agree to take your call, to meet with you again, or to respond to your email. But if all you're looking at is to have that person respond to you and then send them a CV or say, geez, I'd like to work in your department, that isn't going to happen. It's important that you understand it's a series of baby steps. If you'd like an analogy, I'll give you an analogy. We all remember when we were 15 or 16 years old, and the guys who went to that first date, right? We went to that first dance. And so we went to that first dance, and you stood across the room, and all the girls were on the other side of the room, and you saw that girl you really liked, right? And you saw that girl you really liked, and you said, geez, I'm going to ask her to dance. And you went over and you asked her to dance, and sure enough, she said yes. So you were dancing with her. I keep telling guys, I said, what was the first thing in your mind when you were dancing with her? What was the first thing you wanted? And the reality is what you wanted was her phone number. Isn't that true? You wanted her phone number because what you wanted was you wanted to phone her and you wanted to get that first date, just you and her, so you could get to know her better. You get her to really like you and all that. And then once you got that first date, you wanted to get another date. And then you wanted to go steady. And then you want to eventually led to something else. Networking is the same way. It's a series of steps. I can use that same example and put on the ladies' perspective. What did the ladies want when that guy asked her to dance? They wanted to be respected. They wanted to be entertained. They wanted to feel comfortable. And that's building trust, right? Trust, value, contribution. It's a series of steps that you take responsibility for and begin to move forward.
And just watching some of your videos, you talk a little bit about a 15-word position statement. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how would you craft a position statement?
Well, and some of the things we do in an interaction, we're not really aware of what's happening and why. And so I've taken the networking process, and that's exactly what it is a process, and I've broken it down into a series of what I call phases. And so the initial phase is building context. That's when you connect with that other person and you talk about where you come from or the schools or what you do and all that kind of stuff. But at some point, that other person will ask you what I call that magic question. And the magic question is, what do you do? Now, when people ask that question, most people misconstrue what people are asking for. People think they're asking me for what I do. That's not really what they're asking. Because isn't it true when you meet someone and you kind of have that nice conversation and your little voice up in your mind, you're saying, well, yeah, I kind of like him. He seems okay. I wonder what he does. But what we're really asking is not what does he do, it's what's his value. That's what we want to know, right? What's his value so that I can take advantage of it or whether I know somebody else who can. Because first we buy people first, ideas next, and things last in that order. That's how it works. So you build context and then the other person will ask you, what do you do? Which really means what's your value. So it's important that you communicate the value that you represent. And your value is usually in three specific areas. First area is what is your role if you're in the corporate world? What role? And many of us have more than one role, right? So you want to pick the primary role you have and you want to share that with someone. So what's your role? Next one is what's your primary skill? And skill, this isn't about bragging. This is about sharing your value. What's your uppermost competency? What's the skill that you feel is paramount to your success? What's the learned skill that you have? So it's about what your role is, what your primary skill is, and by the way, if you stop there, that would be effective communication. But there is one more piece. If you add it into the mix, will have that person not only remember you, but be able to share it with others. So it's about your role, what's your primary skill, and the third one is what is the contribution you make with that skill through that role. So it's about number one, your role, number two, your primary skill, and number three, the most tangible contribution you make to your department, to your team, or to your company. And that information must be wrapped into a statement that is 15 words or less. Now people say, well, why does it need to be 15 words or less? Well, if you're in a room full of people, you're standing with someone, what's his or her usual attention span? It's about 7 seconds today. So 15 seconds or less is what you need to do. And just to give you an example, people say to me, Michael, what do you do? And so I know they're asking, what's my value? I'll say I'm known as North America's networking guru. I specialize in helping professionals increase results or profits by building better relationships. So my role is as a coach. My primary skill is building better relationships. And the contribution I make is helping people improve results and profits.
Great. Now, one thing that a lot of us take part in are these offsite conferences, trade shows, educational events. For these specific events, do you have a specific strategy that you recommend individuals follow from a networking perspective?
Well, the important thing to realize for everyone out there is every one of those environments is different. It's a similar activity, but every one of those activities is a different environment. A conference, for example, is usually 2 to 3 days. That's like a networking marathon as opposed to just going to an event. So it's important to realize that there will be an ebb and flow. Lots of energy and enthusiasm when you first get there, like the first night or the first morning. But then as you keep going to luncheons and seminars and social events, it kind of wears off a little bit. The second one, a trade show. A trade show is almost like speed networking, right? It's important that you have 2 quick questions to ask, 2 quick points to bring forward, 2 good news stories to bring forward, and that you think in terms of working the crowd. A learning environment, to me, is one of the most overlooked networking environments where you can simply get a lot of contacts, and that's because any learning environment is in and of itself a networking environment where you're going to be with someone. It develops tremendous context because you're all in the same room for 4 hours around the one topic. You're connecting with people who generally have similar interests to you, so it can be a real incredible place to do that. You know, having said all of that, you know, the one thing I try and remind people is all of these networking environments, their fundamental premise is to help foster and grow a network. Remember, I talked about network laws. Well, there's a network law that's called the network law of random growth. And it says that your network is in a continuous state of random growth. I ask people, I say, how many of you know more people today than you did 6 months ago? And invariably, every hand in the room goes up. Why? Because the nature of who we are as social beings, we're continually meeting to. But I keep telling people, what if those connections you're making are not accidental? What about if the universe is bringing into your life all the resources you want and need? And you see, that's the greatest impact of these networking events, these networking environments, is that they offer exponential network growth. Even if you're in a corporate environment, you don't have time to network, but if you go to a 3-day conference, if you use that conference effectively, if you network effectively, you can come out of that conference with 25 or 30 solid contacts with other professionals in your industry that can have a tremendous impact in your career. So networking in an organized environment like that is really about exponential network growth and its impact on your future success.
So you mentioned the 12 to 24 hour follow-up period. Now, that being said, okay, we've done that. Do you have any strategies? And this might be a bit of a broad question, but what are your recommendations for staying in contact with that person?
Yeah, and you know, what we're talking about here, Brian, is relationships, right? It's all about relationships. It's all about nurturing relationships. Relationships, by their very nature, are unique and individual and follow a unique and individual pattern. It's really individual to the person, to the relationship, and to the environment. So it's important to assess each person that you're in contact with and know where the relationship is and how it moves forward. Relationships, by their very nature, generally have a very quick start and then tend to level off, and then will either grow and grow and die, or grow and be replenished, because relationships need to be replenished, right? You have, if you look at from a relationship standpoint, you have certain people in your life that you get to know for a brief period of time, either on a broad project basis or because you and he or she have some kind of individual connection. So you get to know them for a brief period of time. Other people you get to know over time, get to know better, but for one reason or another can keep going. And other people stay and maintain in our lives for a long period of time. The idea is to recognize the value of each relationship, how those can impact your life, and then stagger and organize a follow-up process that's linked into each. And generally that links into the time frames that we're generally comfortable with. It could be once every 90 days for a business relationship. It could be once a year for a friend. It could be more often than that with someone that you reconnect with. It's all about recognizing the value of the relationship, its impact on your life, whether that's professional or personal. And those can intertwine. And in the last piece is recognizing how it impacts your time. Because the one thing is, it's not that we don't know enough people. Most of us know too many people. It's prioritizing the relationships that we need to do. So what I tell people is a formal activity you should have on your calendar, especially if you're a professional who wants to get ahead, is every 6 months, do a relationship review. Remember I talked earlier about the top 10 big 3 list. You should be reevaluating your relationships every 6 months because you evolve just as your relationships evolve. So those relationships will transition as far as their priority, their importance, and their value for you.
All right, great. Now you touched on prioritizing. Also earlier you spoke about mentorship. In a situation where you're seeking mentorship from an individual, is there a way to approach them where, maybe it's not as awkward, where you can kind of set the stage to make it a little bit more comfortable for someone to be accepting of that opportunity to be a mentor?
Brian, excellent question, and it's hard for some people. Here's my take on that. First thing is to remember that everyone needs a mentor. Everyone wants to be a mentor, and so the basic criteria don't change. First of all, I talked about trust, value, contribution, right? If you have an individual that you know who's more senior, who's more influential, someone in your life that you truly respect, and you feel that individual is someone who can have an impact on your career, my recommendation is, as long as there's a basis of trust in the two of you, then you should ask. Because value is a nebulous thing and falls into different categories for different people. We think of value as someone helping your career. We think of value as someone who can lend us money or who can get us that next contact we have. But value can simply be the experience or expertise a person has. And I talked about contribution, and you know what? We all think about contributing in different ways. And when you look at me, I'm a little ahead in life than you are, and there's no bigger compliment I can have than have a younger person approach me and ask me for advice, for recommendations, for information about their career path. Something very important to me is legacy. And many folks in my age bracket thrive on that, to be of service, of value to others as part of our legacy, as an opportunity to be able to contribute to others' lives. So to come full circle, when you ask me that question, I think everyone should have a mentor. Everyone wants to be a mentor, but the relationship is the central focus of this. The first question to ask yourself is, do I have an amount of trust, respect, and appreciation for this person? Do I feel they can help me? Do I feel that they would want to, based on my conversations, my relationship so far with him? And if the question comes out to be yes or I'm not sure, just ask the person. It's a compliment to be asked. And even if they say no, which most of them won't, you'll both walk away feeling better about that particular interaction.
Now you have a resource I want to ask about. It's the Networking Style Assessment. What is this tool, and how would we go about using it and accessing it?
Well, all that came out of some research I did about a dozen years ago when someone asked me the question, is networking about nature or nurture? In other words, are good networkers born? Is it something that's an intrinsic quality we have? People talk about, extroverts are great networkers. Or is it simply nurture? Is it something I can learn and get better at? And that actually forced me to go out and do a whole bunch of research around personality and how it fits. And there's all kinds of research out there about personalities and personality tests and all that, like the DISC environment or competency tests and that. So fundamentally, here's where I come from with this. When we're born, by age 12, each and every one of us has one of 4 basic personality traits. And that's how we end up going through life. And you can take any personality test that will help you identify that. And the 4 categories are you're either a driver or an analytic or social or you're an emotional. And those 4 pieces, the character traits. And so as you grow and evolve, whatever character trait you have that is predominant ends up leading how you communicate, how you behave. It's just based on who we are. If you're a leader, for example, you would be someone who enjoys leading. You would be a manager, an entrepreneur. Not that I'm trying to profile people, but just to give listeners an indication of where those people are. So your characteristics and traits are that you are assertive, that you are positive, that you take action. And those are all the positive pieces. On the other side of the coin, each one of those areas has a similar set of traits for when they're under stress. And networking is a time-constrained, anxiety-filled activity. 90% of professionals tell me that's absolutely true. That when they walk into a networking event, they can feel the stress. It's difficult for people. It's hard for people. They don't know what to say, all this kind of stuff. And there's a whole bunch of psychological and emotional stuff in there. But essentially, for the purposes of this conversation, a person who's a leader and has all those positive traits, when they walk into a networking event, may end up exhibiting some of those negative traits that they demonstrate under stress. And that might be they get very, their face gets very tight. They don't smile. You ever met one of those people? They don't smile. The questions they ask are very direct. They want to do. So that's an example of one personality category that under duress transitions from being a very personable, positive person to someone who may be a little more difficult. Each of the 4 personality character traits have those same dynamics. Have positive, personable traits, but under duress can regress. Now, the importance and value for that is for people to understand that in a networking environment, at a conference, when you walk into a learning event, when you walk into a meeting with a bunch of clients that you don't know, what happens is your stress level starts to rise and you have a tendency to revert back to your dominant personality trait and maybe come up a little more negative. So the first part of that personality trait piece is to help people understand that there is the possibility and probability that sometimes they're not acting as perhaps they would like, they're not behaving as perhaps they would like to in a networking environment, but don't realize it. So it's to help people realize, number 1, what is my dominant characteristic, number 1. And number 2 is, how do I demonstrate that? And number 3 is, what can I do to offset that? So the personality skills assessment is designed to help people better appreciate what is my dominant trait. And number 2, what can I do to offset that or to minimize it? Because as human beings, awareness is a huge piece for us, right? When we become more aware that we're doing something or something is happening, we can then assess, reevaluate, and adapt to deal with it better. So I have a whole program around that I designed about 10 years ago. It's how personality styles impact networking results. And the personality styles assessment was an outflow or a component of that particular program.
All right, and it sounds like a tremendous resource. How do we access it?
All anybody needs to do is just send me a message at info@networkingforresults.com, info@networkingforresults.com. And I'd be happy to send you a copy of that and talk about how this could be helpful to you.
You touched on social media as well. What are some of the ways that we can leverage social media for networking purposes?
Absolutely huge. Absolutely huge. And you know, I started really getting involved in, people say, you know, actually about 15 years ago when the social networking environment exploded, people were actually saying there'll be no more need for face-to-face networking because we've got all these online networks now. And the reality is that's just not true, because as social beings, we need to be together. I've got a whole program on how to effectively use online networks. And the biggest comment I'm going to make to you at this point in time is that, in my estimation, 90 to 95% of professionals just do not understand how to effectively use online networks. And so the predominant piece there are really just three, what I call the big three. I mean, I could rhyme off at least a dozen social networks. But from an effective social network perspective, when it comes to business networks, the big three are still LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And so when I look at all three, I call LinkedIn the ambassador's ball. It's professional. It's structured. There are specific rules of engagement. It's more professional than anything else. Facebook is what I call the weekend house party. It's more loosey-goosey. I mean, the line between personal and professional kind of gravitates. People are more open. And Twitter is like speed networking online. You know, the world at 140 characters a minute. And so when I first got involved in this about 10 years ago, I got to tell you, I did like everybody else. And I mean, I was everywhere. I thought I was on every book I read, every course I went to, you got to be online. You got to do. And then I stopped for a minute. I said, wait a minute now. I mean, this isn't producing for me. And so I did a complete reevaluation of my involvement with online networks. And here's the conclusion I came to. Online networks are really just an extension of regular networks. They're a variation on a theme. I mean, if you look back to why online networks were created, they were to facilitate and foster relationship building. And still today, that's what they're designed to do. But here's a question I ask people. I say, would you, if you found a network that you thought could help your career or your business, I said, and you took all the time and effort to go through the application, fill out the application, and learn how the network worked and everything, and you went to your first event, and you just stood there, and people walked up to you, and you never had a conversation with them, and you just exchanged business cards, would that make sense to you? Would you expect to get any business? Would you expect to get promoted or find a new job? Well, people say no. I said, well, what happens online? Online, I ask people, do you ever get somebody invite you to connect? They say yes. I said, well, what's the first thing you do? Well, I go and check their profile. Because online, our profile is our online avatar, right? So check their profile. And if they're not from Nigeria selling blood diamonds, if they're local in the environment, they're professional, what's the next thing you do? People say, well, I invite them to connect. I say, okay. I say, what happens next? People look around and they say absolutely nothing. Does that make sense to you? Of course not. So my number one suggestion with people is that networking online is an additional dynamic and an environment that you need to be involved in. Having said that, you need to recognize that the fundamental networking principles that you apply in real life apply online. If you're going to invite someone to connect and not start a conversation with them, if you're going to agree to connect with someone online and not have a conversation with them, then it's ludicrous. It makes no sense. So what I suggest to people is to think in terms of having a strong profile, because it's your avatar, right? It's the first thing people see. It gives you incredible valuable information about you, your career, and your background. And at the same time, when someone invites you to connect, you want to go and check out that person's profile. And if you feel that there's value, that you want to connect with them, you have an obligation to yourself and to them to start a conversation with them. And once you do that, you will be amazed. When I went through this little paradigm shift and started thinking, I said to myself, you know, it is about relationships. So I started having conversations. I mean, it was amazing how those conversations built into information I got, clients I got, The simple fact you and I are sitting here having this conversation, Brian, is as a result of a LinkedIn connection that we had. And so online networking is important. It's a necessary part of a professional's toolkit. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that without a relationship building perspective and proactive approach, it's never going to work.
My next question is just about you. What are you up to these days, and where can we interact with you, and where can we see you?
Well, Brian, one of the wonderful things about me is I've got this incredible passion for this topic and a wealth of information about it. And I'm invited to speak across North America about networking. I speak at conferences. I was just in Trinidad last fall in November. I'm heading off to Indianapolis shortly. So I speak at conferences everywhere. This is an idea. People say more than 50% of the reason why people go to a conference is to network. Unfortunately, most people don't understand how to network at a conference. So what I do is bring that education component and the capacity for people to get more value out of a conference. The other thing I do is I do training with organizations. I've worked with companies like Dell, Staples, RBC Royal Bank to help their teams better understand how to network internally amongst themselves, as well as externally with the business of there. So I have in-house programs. I do public programs twice a year. I do a full one-day workshop to help professionals become more immersed and understand the fundamental principles around networking that I've learned and developed, and share that with them. And then finally, I do coaching and consulting. I work individually with people who want to grow their business, accelerate their career. And I've been brought in for people like the Ottawa Senators and for people like the Puerto Rico Tourism Company to help them work with their teams and to grow their whole business. So I got a pretty active life. Pretty busy, and would love to chat with anyone listening here about how I could be helpful to you, to your organization, or to your career.
Do you have any last advice or just anything else that you wanted to cover?
Well, traditionally, when I deliver a program, here's the last message I give to people. And I want to invite everyone listening here to listen very carefully here. Everyone you meet has the potential to help you to the extent that he or she is willing and able. Your mission, I believe your obligation, is to stimulate their willingness as you discover their ability to help you in your life, in your career, or in your world. Now, go work your network.
Awesome. Now, you said you would like for us to reach out to you. How do we do that? What's the best way to reach out to you?
www.networkingforresults.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time, Michael. I really appreciate you doing this, and there's a lot of value in the words that you shared with us today.
My pleasure.
And that concludes another episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. Thank you very much for taking the time to spend with us. And I'm just going to encourage you again to connect with us on social media. Again, we have groups on LinkedIn and Facebook. And as well, you can connect with me on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Thanks again for joining us. Join us again next week when we have a new guest and a new topic. Take care.